In this video, we'll review the cases of the offenders who, after years on death row, were finally executed during the month of September. We'll look at the crimes they committed, the victims they left behind, the judicial process that sentenced them, as well as their final meals and the last words they spoke before death. That month, 4 executions were carried out in the United States using 2 different methods: lethal gas and lethal injection. David Joseph Pittman, State, Florida. The story that led to this tragedy began years earlier. Pittman had been married to Marie Knowles Pridgeon, another daughter of Clarence and Barbara, but the relationship deteriorated badly. In October 1989, Marie filed for divorce, a process that was far from amicable and which Pittman strongly opposed. During this time, he made repeated violent threats against Marie and her family, making it clear that he intended to harm them if she went through with the divorce. The situation escalated dramatically when Pittman, who had just been released from prison on an unrelated grand theft charge, learned that Bonnie Knowles had attempted to press criminal charges against him for an alleged rape that had occurred 5 years earlier in 1985. Although prosecutors could not pursue the case because the statute of limitations had expired, this revelation greatly intensified Pittman's anger toward the entire Knowles family. It is worth noting that the 1985 incident had resulted in Pittman's only prior conviction for a violent crime, an aggravated assault to which he had pled guilty. According to detailed testimony from jailhouse informant Carl Hughes, who shared a cell with Pittman from June 20th to 27th, 1990, on the night of the crime, Pittman called Bonnie Knowles, asking her to speak with her parents about letting him see his children. Pittman went to the family residence in the early morning hours of May 15th, after deliberately cutting the telephone line from outside the house. Once there, he tapped on Bonnie's bedroom window, and she let him inside. Inside the home, according to the confession Pittman made to Hughes, he tried to persuade Bonnie to have sexual intercourse with him, but she refused, saying she was on her menstrual cycle. When Pittman pressed further, suggesting oral sex, Bonnie's refusal enraged him. She screamed for help, causing Pittman to completely lose control. To silence her cries, he slit her throat and stabbed her multiple times. Hearing her daughter's screams, Barbara Knowles ran into the hallway outside Bonnie's bedroom, where Pittman attacked her and stabbed her 3 times. He then moved into the living room, where he found Clarence desperately trying to use the telephone to call for help, but Pittman knocked him down and stabbed him 5 times in the hallway. After the murders, Pittman carried out a deliberate plan to destroy evidence. He went to an outside shed and retrieved gasoline, which he carried back into the house and poured over Bonnie's bed. To intensify the blaze, he placed a tire under the bed before spreading more fuel throughout the home. He washed his hands and wiped the blood from his clothing in the bathroom before setting the house on fire from outside. He then stole the keys to Bonnie's brown Toyota, placed the gas container inside the vehicle, and fled the scene. Pittman drove near his father's house, parked the stolen car, and entered the residence through the back door at around 2:30 or 3 a.m. Later that morning, he returned to the abandoned vehicle while sitting in his own tow truck, watching from a distance as police discovered the Toyota in flames. The police investigation quickly focused on Pittman. A key witness, James Trope, a construction worker, saw the Toyota abandoned in a ditch around 6:30 a.m. and noticed an orange glow coming from the back of the vehicle. More importantly, Trope had previously seen a vehicle he described as a tow truck approaching the abandoned car, and later identified this vehicle as belonging to Pittman. Another crucial witness was a resident of a nearby apartment complex who, at around 6:40 a.m., saw the car burning and a man fleeing the scene. This woman provided police with a detailed description of the suspect and later identified Pittman from a photo lineup. Fearing that police would suspect his involvement in the murders, Pittman voluntarily turned himself in the next day at his mother's urging, though he steadfastly maintained his innocence. Pittman's trial began on March 18, 1991, nearly a year after the crimes. On March 25, 1991, after 4 days of deliberation, the jury found Pittman guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of premeditated arson, and 1 count of grand theft. He was sentenced to death. During the penalty phase, prosecutors emphasized the brutality of the crimes and Pittman's history of threats against the Knowles family. The defense attempted to present evidence of Pittman's intellectual disability and the childhood abuse he had suffered, as well as his low IQ, estimated at around 70. Over the next 34 years, Pittman exhausted numerous appeals in both state and federal courts. His attorneys argued violations of due process, prosecutorial misconduct, and the unconstitutionality of executing a person with intellectual disability. The Florida Supreme Court denied his clemency petition on September 11, 2025, and the U.S. Supreme Court rejected his final appeal on September 16, 2025. That same day, Governor Ron DeSantis signed the death warrant, his 12th, setting a record for a Florida governor. On September 17, 2025, David Joseph Pittman, age 63, was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison in Stark. The protocol used consisted of midazolam as a sedative, vecuronium bromide as a paralytic, and potassium chloride to stop the heart. Pittman's final meal, eaten hours before his death, included fried chicken, steak, biscuits, chocolate, and soda. At 6 p.m., Pittman was escorted into the execution chamber. After receiving the sedative, he took several deep breaths for about 90 seconds. Then, the vecuronium paralyzed his muscles, and finally, the potassium chloride halted his cardiac activity. At 6:12 p.m., the presiding official pronounced him dead, with no signs of extreme suffering beyond the initial respiratory movements. Before his death, in a low voice as he leaned toward the microphone, Pittman delivered his final words. "I know all of you came here to watch an innocent man be killed by the state of Florida. I am innocent. I didn't kill anyone, that's all." With that, the execution concluded, making him the 12th person executed in Florida in 2025 and the first in the month of September. David Joseph Pittman's ex-wife, who is also the daughter and sister of the victims, witnessed his execution. Blaine Keith Milam, State, Texas. In December 2008, at the age of 18, Blaine Keith Milam committed one of the most brutal crimes in Texas history against a 13-month-old girl. The victim was Amora Bain Carson, the daughter of his girlfriend, Jessica Carson, in a trailer located in Rusk County, East Texas. On December 2, 2008, around 10:30 a.m., Blaine Keith Milam called 911 to report that he had found the baby dead.
December 2, 2008, 16 hours, 48 minutes, 15 seconds.
Rescue 911.
Yes. My name's Blaine Milam, and my daughter, I just found her dead.
How old's your daughter?
13 months.
13 months old? Okay, let me connect you with the ambulance service, okay?
Initially, Milam and Carson, who was also 18 at the time, gave conflicting statements to the police about what had happened. First, they claimed they had left the house and found the child injured. Then, they said she had eaten insulation from the walls. And finally, they alleged they had performed an exorcism on her because she was possessed by a demon. According to court records, Amora Carson's torture lasted approximately 30 hours. Prosecutors alleged that Milam brutally beat the girl with a hammer, as well as bit, strangled, and mutilated her during this prolonged period. The forensic pathologist who performed the autopsy found that the child had multiple skull fractures, along with broken arms, legs, and ribs, as well as numerous human bite marks. The physical evidence at the crime scene was overwhelming. A search of Milam's trailer revealed blood splatter consistent with blunt force trauma, blood-stained bedding and baby clothes, diapers and wipes with blood, a tube of Astroglide lubricant, and a pair of jeans with blood on the lap. DNA testing confirmed that the blood on these items belonged to Amora. Days after the murder, Milam's sister visited him in jail, and that night told their aunt that she needed to go to Milam's trailer because he had instructed her to remove evidence from underneath it. The aunt called the police, who immediately obtained a search warrant. During a search under the trailer, they found a pipe key inside a clear plastic bag that had been pushed through a hole in the main bathroom floor. Forensic analysis revealed traces of Astroglide on the pipe key, on Amora's diaper, and on the diapers and wipes collected from the trailer. The medical examiner described Amora's injuries as the most brutal case he had ever seen in his career. The child had been severely beaten, strangled, sexually mutilated, and had 24 human bite marks covering her entire body. The pathologist testified at trial that he could not determine a specific cause of death because the child had so many potentially fatal injuries. Milam also confessed to a nurse after his arrest. According to records, Carson later told investigators that Milam had told her Amora was possessed by a demon because God was tired of her lying to Milam. The case received so much attention that the trial had to be moved 140 miles south to Montgomery County to ensure a fair process. Milam was tried separately from Jessica Carson and, on June 11, 2010, at age 20, was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death. Carson, although the child's biological mother, was considered an accomplice and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the trial, Milam's defense presented evidence of intellectual disability, which, under Atkins v. Virginia, would make him ineligible for the death penalty. However, the jury rejected this claim. Milam had only completed up to the 4th grade and had no prior criminal record. Milam received 2 execution stays in 2019 and 2021, while his appeals were resolved, but all were denied after he was declared mentally competent for execution. Finally, on September 25, 2025, Blaine Keith Milam was executed at the Huntsville State Penitentiary by lethal injection and pronounced dead at 6:45 p.m. Interestingly, according to reports, Milam did have a special last meal, even though Texas normally only allows the standard prison menu. His final meal consisted of a cheeseburger, baked fries, green beans, pinto beans, sandwich bread, scrambled eggs, homemade gravy, a sausage burger, pears, cookies, tea, and water. Tied to the gurney, he was asked if he wanted to say any last words. Milam responded yes and spoke aloud from the death chamber. "If any of you wish to see me again, I implore you all, no matter who you are, to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and we will meet again. I love you all. Take me home, Jesus." He also left a written statement, which would serve as his true final words. "I want to especially thank everyone for their kindness, compassion, empathy, love, support, and for believing in me. Thank you for everything you have done. I also want to thank the TDCJ chaplaincy directors for opening the faith program on death row and allowing me to be accepted to find Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior." While this was happening, his lawyers filed a last-minute appeal in an attempt to save him. However, the Supreme Court did not block his execution. According to reports, after the lethal injection was administered, Milam moved backward and complained for approximately 15 minutes until he was pronounced dead by the prison doctor.
She was a great little girl. She was beautiful. She was beautiful. Wasn't walking yet, but she was beautiful. Her first words were "Daddy."
And you were not even the biological father, but you were daddy for her.
Yes, sir.
That was the first thing she ever said.
Yes, sir.
Can you still see her face when she said that?
Yes, sir. I miss her. There ain't nothing I can do.
And you loved her.
I did. I loved her and Jessica. That was a joke.
Look at Mom.
I mean, you don't know how it happened. They wouldn't let it into trial, but she thought she was possessed by a demon, in case you didn't know.
How is it possible that such an angelic little girl, a toddler, is being possessed by Satan, by demons? How do you know? How does it happen?
Jessica thought the cat was possessed by the demon. I don't know how it happens.
Geoffrey Todd West, State, Alabama. On the night of March 27th, 1997, stretching into the early hours of the 28th, Geoffrey Todd West drove to the Harold's Chevron gas station, accompanied by his 17-year-old girlfriend, Amy Pierce. He knew the place well, having previously worked at the convenience store, which gave him an advantage in planning the robbery. According to court records, West had told others of his intention to rob the Chevron and leave no witnesses, even saying he would kill anyone he found there. The victim was Margaret Berry, a 33-year-old mother of two who had only been working at the gas station for a few days when the tragedy occurred. West entered armed with a .45 caliber pistol and forced Berry to hand over the money, about $250 kept in a cookie tin behind the counter. Moments later, Berry was forced to lie on the floor and was shot in the back of the head while lying face down, causing nearly instantaneous death. The police investigation began just hours after the body was discovered. Investigators had a starting point when Donna Mitchell, a gas station employee, reported seeing Geoffrey West and Scott Huey in the store within 24 to 48 hours before the robbery. This testimony was crucial in directing the investigation toward West. Amy Pierce, West's 17-year-old girlfriend at the time, became a key witness for the prosecution. Initially arrested as an accomplice, she agreed to testify against him in exchange for a reduced sentence of 35 years in prison. During the investigation, letters West had sent her from prison were uncovered, many with sections erased by Pierce, later recovered by forensic experts. Geoffrey Todd West's trial began on June 1st, 1999, in the Etowah County Circuit Court. He had court-appointed attorneys, and the prosecution presented a strong case based on the autopsy, Pierce's testimony, and the analysis of West's letters. In a controversial decision, the court ordered West to wear an electric shock belt throughout the trial, delivering shocks over 50,000 volts in each test in front of him. On June 1st, 1999, West was found guilty of capital murder during a robbery. His attorneys did not present witnesses or mitigating evidence, and the jury voted 10-2 in favor of the death penalty. On July 7, 1999, Judge William Cardwell formally sentenced West to death, acknowledging the difficulty of ordering the execution of such a young man, but noting that the murder had been clearly deliberate and intentional, executed in an execution-style manner. West spent more than 26 years on Alabama's death row. In a phone interview before his scheduled execution, he expressed remorse. "Not a day goes by that I don't wish I could change what I did. I replay that day in my head, wishing I had turned around and walked away. I wish I could switch places so it would be me, not her." In 2018, when Alabama allowed death row inmates to choose their method of execution, Geoffrey Todd West opted for the controversial nitrogen hypoxia. At that time, the state had not yet developed a protocol for its application, and it was uncertain whether experts would consider this method one of the most painful and torturous. In January 2024, Alabama carried out the first execution by this method with Kenneth Eugene Smith. During the procedure, Smith visibly struggled to breathe for several minutes, which was widely criticized as a form of torture. Since then, the number of inmates choosing nitrogen hypoxia has decreased significantly. Will Berry, the victim's son, who was 11 when his mother was killed, publicly opposed Geoffrey Todd West's execution. He argued that the death penalty would not bring back his mother and would only increase his family's pain. Over time, through his faith, he said he found a new perspective and even forgave West. Berry sent letters to Governor Kay Ivey and participated in vigils against the death penalty, requesting that the sentence be commuted to life imprisonment. However, Ivey responded that Alabama law mandates the death penalty for the most heinous crimes. Finally, Geoffrey Todd West was executed on September 25, 2025 at 6:15 p.m. at the William C. Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama. He was 50 years old at the time of his death. West was strapped to a gurney with restraints on his chest, wrists, and legs. A clear gas mask with blue edges covering his entire face was placed on him, connected to a hose supplying pure nitrogen. The gas replaced breathable oxygen, causing death by asphyxiation. Although authorities claimed the method would cause unconsciousness within seconds, West convulsed and shook violently for 4 minutes before being pronounced dead at 6:15 p.m., becoming the 5th person to die by this method since Alabama implemented it in 2024. The day before his death, he received visits from 8 family members who spent his final hours with him. For his last meal, the prison granted him $20 to spend on a special request, and West chose chicken quesadillas. When the moment arrived, the prison warden asked if he had any last words. West simply replied, "No, sir." Strapped to the gurney with a blue-rimmed gas mask covering his face, he gave a thumbs-up gesture toward his attorney. The execution began at 5:56 p.m. Witnesses reported that West kept his eyes open, swallowing hard and struggling to breathe during the first few minutes. His head rocked from side to side, his left fist clenched, and he appeared to foam slightly at the mouth. At 6:01, he began breathing slowly with long pauses, until he became motionless shortly after 6:07. Finally, he was pronounced dead at 6:22 p.m. In a final statement released through his attorney, West said, "I privately apologize to the family of Margaret Parrish Berry, and I am honored by the forgiveness given to me by her son, Will." He also added that earlier this year he was baptized in the Catholic Church, and that he was at peace because he knew where he was going. Victor Tony Jones, State, Florida. On September 30th, 2025, after spending more than 32 years on death row, Victor Tony Jones was executed by lethal injection in the execution chamber of a Florida state prison. It was the final hours of December 19th, 1990 in Miami-Dade, Florida. Victor was 29 years old, but his life was already irreparably broken. He had grown up in poverty, abandoned by his mother at a young age and raised by relatives. During his adolescence, he spent time at the Florida School for Boys in Okeechobee, a reform school notorious for the physical, psychological, and sexual abuse inflicted on minors. There, Jones endured physical torture, assaults by older inmates, beatings with leather straps, and long periods in solitary confinement. That night in 1990, Victor had a plan that would change multiple lives forever. His path was no accident. He was heading to Nestor Engineering, a small engineering firm in the Wynwood neighborhood. Victor had only started working there the day before. He knew the place, had observed the schedules, and knew the elderly couple who owned the business were generous with their employees. But his intentions were far from gratitude or loyalty. He had a different plan in mind. Jacob Nestor, 67, and his wife Matilda Nestor, 66, were Jewish immigrants who had moved to Miami from Brooklyn. Jacob was a World War II veteran, an inventor with 17 registered patents, and a man known in the neighborhood for his kindness toward those in need. He had married Dolly, his high school sweetheart, just before leaving for the European front. They had 2 children, Michael Nestor, who would later become a hero during the September 11th attacks, and Irene Fisher. It was a loving family. Jacob and Matilda were happily married and deeply in love. The Nestors had a habit of hiring people in vulnerable situations, paying them daily without asking too many questions about their backgrounds. They offered work purely out of kindness. This is how Victor came to be employed there. Victor entered the business with a clear plan: to steal money, targeting a family of considerable means. When Dolly headed to the bathroom at the back of the building, he silently approached from behind and stabbed her at the base of her neck with a knife. The wound was devastating. It severed her aorta, causing massive bleeding. Hearing the attack, Jacob rushed out of the main office to defend his wife, but Victor confronted him and stabbed him directly in the chest, piercing his heart. Yet Jacob Nestor was not a man to give up easily. Despite being mortally wounded, the war veteran managed to retreat to his office, where he kept a .22 caliber pistol. For approximately 20 to 25 minutes, according to later testimonies, Jacob struggled against Victor while losing blood. In that desperate moment, his intentions were clear: to defend his wife to the very end. Finally, Jacob managed to grab his gun and fired 5 shots at Victor. One of the bullets struck Victor squarely in the forehead, a wound that should have been fatal, but miraculously, it did not kill him. A UPS driver making a routine delivery discovered the crime scene. When paramedics and police arrived, they found Jacob and Dolly Nestor dead. Jacob was sitting on the sofa with his wife's purse in his lap and a bottle of whiskey nearby. Victor Jones was slumped on a sofa in the main office, conscious but gravely injured. 2 lives had been ended for just a few $100s, yet the police were not far behind. The investigation moved quickly, and Victor was found agonizing with cash, keys, credit cards, and personal belongings of both victims in his pockets, confirming the motive of robbery. Victor was rushed to the hospital for treatment of his gunshot wound and made incriminating statements. He confessed to a nurse that he had killed the couple because they owed him money. Authorities and the family found this claim unbelievable, as the Nestors were well known for helping people in need. Prosecutors would later say the case was essentially solved immediately. Physical evidence, Victor's own statements, and the clear motive provided detectives with everything they needed. Victor was arrested at once, but it took time for him to stand trial. In February 1993, the judicial process finally began. By then, the state had compiled a mountain of evidence, including Victor's hospital confessions and physical evidence directly linking him to the crime. On February 1st, 1993, the jury found Victor guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of armed robbery. That same afternoon, the sentencing phase began. The jury had to decide: life imprisonment without parole or the death penalty. Victor's attorneys tried to present mitigating evidence regarding his difficult childhood and the abuse he suffered at the reform school. But in 1993, this information was not fully recognized by the state. The jury recommended the death penalty for both murders, for Dolly Nestor's death by a 10-2 margin, and for Jacob Nestor's death unanimously. A month later, on March 1st, 1993, the judge reviewed the case and agreed. Victor was sentenced to die. The court cited clear aggravating factors. The murders were committed during a robbery, and he had killed innocent people for money. His relative youth was considered a mitigating factor, but ultimately, it did not matter. The brutality of the crime outweighed everything else. Although he had been sentenced to death, Victor probably did not expect that more than 3 decades would pass before the sentence was finally carried out. Over the years, he filed appeal after appeal seeking a way out, claiming intellectual disability and trauma from the institutional abuse he suffered in his youth. In 2024, in an unexpected turn, Florida officially recognized the systematic abuse in reform schools where Victor had spent his childhood. In January 2025, the Florida Attorney General's office sent Victor a letter formally acknowledging that he had been a victim of institutional abuse, and in July, they deposited financial compensation into his prison account. Despite this, his conviction and death sentence remained in place. Meanwhile, after 32 years on death row, Victor's time was running out. A date was finally set: September 30th, 2025. The legal battles had ended, and the state was preparing to carry out the sentence. Michael Nestor, a 9/11 hero, had passed away in 2020 from brain cancer, believed to be related to inhaling toxic substances present in the dust of Ground Zero. Throughout his life, he carried the pain of having lost his parents and the wish to witness the execution of their killer. It is remarkable how different people's lives can be. Victor, a murderer who took the lives of a married couple, and in contrast, Michael Nestor, their son, who became a hero during one of the greatest tragedies in history, saving many lives. During his lifetime, Michael wrote 2 books recounting his experiences. Since Michael could no longer be present, and because of the profound loss experienced by the family, many surviving relatives decided to attend Victor's execution, including his sister. Irene Fisher, now 76 years old, had carried that wound for 35 years. She was old enough when the crime occurred to understand what had happened, and the weight of that tragedy had followed her for decades. She had witnessed how every headline, every hearing, and every appeal focused on Victor. Now, with the execution scheduled for September 30th, Irene surprised many by publicly declaring, "Yes, I forgive him. I forgive him because it is." On August 29th, 2025, Governor Ron DeSantis signed the execution order, setting the date for September 30th, 2025. The clock kept ticking and the state moved forward with the scheduled execution. Finally, Victor Tony Jones was executed on September 30th, 2025, at 6:13 p.m. at Florida State Prison near Stark, becoming the 13th execution of the year in the state and setting a historic record. That day, he woke up at 4:30 a.m., met with a spiritual advisor, and received no other visitors, remaining cooperative throughout, according to officials. His last meal consisted of fried chicken, collard greens, and sweet tea. Already strapped to the gurney and about to receive the lethal injection, he was asked if he had any final words, to which he simply replied, "No, sir." The execution was carried out by lethal injection using the standard 3-drug protocol, with no complications, according to Governor's spokesperson, Alex Lanfranconi. And that's all for today's video. What do you think about the execution that just took place? Do you believe it was just or not? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to keep up with the next executions, as next month will be the one with the most executions in the country this year, with a total of 8 scheduled.